Hi, this is Mike Boland, analyst with BIA Kelsey. And in lieu of an analyst roundtable this week, what we're going to do is take a look at a presentation that I gave last week during a webinar. We're going to show actually the video and voiceover replay of that presentation because I think it's very important for BIA Kelsey blog readers and clients and others to really start to look at this particular topic, which is one of mobile push alerts. So in the age of the smartphone and in the age of a billion apps in iOS alone, one big challenge is getting users to not only download your app, but also then to engage on an ongoing basis. A very common KPI in the mobile app world is mobile active usage, not just downloads, because there's a heavy drop-off rate after free apps are downloaded. So push alerts has become one way to engage users on an ongoing basis by meeting them halfway and coming to where they are. It's something that, of course, happens at the operating system level, almost like a text message, but having some advantages over text. So we're seeing lots of great ways this is playing out in retail, in mobile ad targeting, in various forms of mobile marketing, and in some kind of emerging areas like beacons, as I mentioned, for retail. So in this presentation, what I do is walk through some of the driving factors for push alerts, some of the things that compel them in terms of market factors, and then some case studies. We walk through 5 case studies that really talk about and illustrate how this is playing out. So I'll put a period there because the recording of the presentation pretty much speaks for itself. It's about 20 minutes long, and I hope that anyone interested in this subject further can contact me. My contact information can be found here on this screen to engage further over, again, what is going to be a very key topic in the development of mobile content delivery and marketing going forward. So thanks for listening, and here's the video. Hope you enjoy.
And then with that, Mike, I'm going to kind of let you talk about why mobile messaging needs to become a bit more targeted and what you see brands doing in the space.
Yeah, thank you, Lauren. So, today's topic is advertised as SMS and push notifications and email. I'm actually going to zero in on push notifications mostly among those 3, so I can maintain focus and provide a little bit of depth there. But a lot of the principles I'll cover equally apply to SMS and email and really any textual messaging that is pushed. So if we go to the next slide, this is my agenda of what I hope to go over in the next 20 minutes. So we'll start with some usage metrics that are driving push alerts, and then we'll go through 5 quick case studies that really illustrate some of the tactics and main takeaways rather than talk about it in the abstract. And then we'll wrap up with a few concluding thoughts and a checklist of action items before I hand it over to Cindy. So let's get right into it. Where I'd like to start is really where we are now with mobile usage, which is kind of a foundational point for the inception and the growth of push alerts. So right now in mobile, we're looking at a very app-centric user environment, at least in terms of time spent with mobile. Users now spend about 80% of their time within apps, compared with web and browser-based content consumption. And another important point is that there are now more than 1 million apps for iOS alone. So if we go to the next slide, and also I'll pause there to ask that all other panelists if you could go on mute because I'm hearing a little bit of an echo. I'm not sure if it's just me, but if all other panelists not speaking can go on mute, that might eliminate that slight echo. Thank you. So moving on to slide 7, what a lot of those usage metrics kind of lead up to is the concept of app fatigue, which is something that we're going to talk about a lot today. And it's getting harder and harder by the day to launch an app and get found. And once someone does download your app, an even bigger challenge lies in getting them to use it on an ongoing and active basis. There's a high drop-off rate, especially with free apps. And overall, about 1/5 of apps are only used once and then abandoned. And this is why true metrics around app success often focus on active users, not downloads. You may have heard Facebook's earnings yesterday in which they were talking about their mobile active users as a key performance metric, and they're now at over 1 billion. But the point is that the focus on active users really carries a premium. So for that reason, one of the points of scarcity and value in mobile and in mobile apps has been this recurring usage. And apps that are able to lock users in or have inherently sticky engagement receive tremendously high valuations. One example, speaking of Facebook, is WhatsApp, whose $19 billion price tag, among a lot of other factors, had a lot to do with this lock-in effect that it's been able to create with users. So all of this basically leads up to the name of the game with app success, which is recurring active usage. And sometimes that comes inherently with the dynamics of an app or a topic or a content area, but sometimes extra steps are needed to make it easier on users to engage. And if we go to the next slide, it's this kind of general spirit of motivating active usage, which is where push alerts come into the picture. Relying on users to actively swipe and tap and drill down into an app can deter their usage. So push alerts come into where, come to where users are and meet them halfway at the OS level. So really, what are push alerts? If we go to the next slide, some of the kind of benefits and downsides I'll go over briefly. Technically speaking, push alerts are happening at the OS level and therefore have the benefits of valuable upfront positioning, such as a user's lock screen. It also comes without carrier SMS fees, even though it kind of looks and acts and carries a lot of the benefits of SMS. It happens at the device level, or at the operating system level, I should say. And importantly, push alerts benefit come from their alignment with a lot of other tech and cultural trends. So in a lot of ways, the timing is right. If you look at some of these kind of macro trends, in mobile, one of them we're seeing a discovery trend where, as opposed to the search paradigm that ruled the desktop, or at least a different kind of search, this has a lot to do with the form factor and the hardware constraints for search query input. It makes a better push experience and a discovery experience as opposed to a pull experience in a lot of cases. And we'll go over that more when we talk about Google Now. Along the same lines, this discovery paradigm is going to loom even larger as we move towards smaller devices that don't contain keyboards, such as wearables and things like Google Glass. In fact, Google just announced this week that it'll integrate with iOS for text messaging and iMessage. That's just the first step among many things. We're going to see a lot of push-based use cases develop around Google Glass and other wearables. And then another kind of macro trend is big data. Big data, of course, I feel silly even saying it. It's almost reached cliche status, but it's still important in a lot of ways. And all the signals that the mobile device is capable of ingesting and processing will be prime fodder to create predictive modeling about what you might be interested in next. And that's a nice kind of foundation for the discovery-based push paradigm that we're talking about here. And then another important macro trend is social sharing. We have Instagram, Vine, Secret, and the list keeps growing. And these are very much based on being in the know. And push alerts bring those updates further to the surface. And this brings up the cultural phenomenon of FOMO, or fear of missing out, which is really kind of a driving factor for a lot of these social sharing apps, and likewise getting pushed updates on a frequent basis. And then the last kind of big trend there is in-store technologies like beacons. These are very much based on push alerts, done so in a proximity-based fashion to engage users while shopping or at sporting events or at museums, and it has a lot of great implications for push messaging, which we'll go over in a bit in a case study. Now to talk briefly about the bad. Those are some of the driving factors and benefits I just mentioned, but what about the challenges? So before we give too rosy of a picture of push messaging, it has to be acknowledged that there's also a dark side to all of this, and we'll spend lots of time going over this today. The most obvious one is overwhelming users or getting greedy with all the factors I just mentioned, and the danger there is that users will delete the app and then you've lost them forever. So it's really a delicate game, and it's a privilege. It should be thought of as a privilege that can't be abused. So what I'd like to do now is, if we go to the next slide, we're going to synthesize some of those factors that I just mentioned to go over through some illustrative examples. And these are just 5 mini case studies I'll go through quickly that hit upon many of the factors I just went over. So let's get right into these. The first one, if we go to the next slide, is probably the most basic one and maybe the one you've heard of most, which is Google Now. So this is essentially Google's effort to establish territory in this environment where search behavior is different. The mobile use case isn't as search-centric as the desktop, and even though search is a leading category of mobile advertising according to the forecasting we do, there's a growing user desire to have things discovered or suggested to them. And they're spending less time in browser, remember, from that previous point I showed. And the browser is traditionally where search lives. So Google Now is Google's answer to all of this, to preserve its upfront positioning and mind share in this developing mobile world. So what Google Now does, briefly for those unfamiliar, is mine the content throughout Google Apps or partner apps on your phone, such as your Gmail inbox or your calendar or weather. And from there, it can see that, for example, you have a flight booked tomorrow, and there's road construction, and the forecast is calling for rain. So leave 15 minutes earlier and take this alternative route to the airport. So that gets to the big data trend I mentioned too, and really just kind of utilizing all these signals. So the practical applications for Google Now will only grow as it continues to mine more data and learn more about users. And one of the points here is that just really opens the door for push messaging, in that it's very organic or native to the use case, such as alerting you of low gas prices on your typical drive to work, and other kind of commercial messaging implications that will develop. So that's the most kind of basic example of push alerts. Now what I want to do is go a bit deeper into some of the kind of tactical analysis or the how. So if we go to the next slide, the next case study I'm going to do is from Find and Save. And this is an app from Wonderful Media, and Wonderful is partly owned by major newspaper publishers. So they have this access to rich trove of weekly circular data and product availability. So it's a pretty robust local shopping app. So anyway, I interviewed the CEO, Ben Smith, at BIA-Kelsey's big conference in December, and here's his quote to me. I won't read it verbatim, but the takeaway is that one of the most important things you can do when launching push alerts in any app or with any campaign is A/B testing. And there's no one-size-fits-all about how your content will resonate, or the copy you should use, or the frequency at which you should be pushing it. It's really purely a matter, I shouldn't say purely, but there's a big part of it that's a matter of testing, because each app is different, each user base is different, and there are key differences in various product shopping areas. For example, he says here that they found out quickly after doing push alerts that in being an aggregator of many different shopping categories and all kinds of different retailers, that you have to segment this. There are a lot of Walgreens, and by contrast, there are not a lot of Home Depots. And the nature of those two stores' products and price points says a lot about how often you're going to be shopping there. So these types of variables really come into the picture for how you kind of develop the art of push messaging and frequency and copy and all that good stuff. So the next slide, similar, more of the same learnings. They found out that a few interesting things about proximity relevance and being the top driver of engagement and response rates, and also timely offers with things such as holidays. So some of these factors are fairly universal, but the point is that testing still should be done for all apps and all campaigns. The next slide, just a quick kind of data point to support some of Ben Smith's findings in the previous case study, showing that some of the biggest things that cause users to react to push messaging are these things I mentioned, price and proximity. I won't go through each of these in the interest of time, but I've included them here for the deeper consumption of anyone listening that will have the opportunity to end up with this deck. You can kind of dig deeper into some of the implications behind these survey data for user sentiment around the types of things they're looking for in their push alerts. So if we move to the next case study, Foursquare is, of course, an app that many people are familiar with, and this is similarly a lesson in A/B testing. Many of you remember that Foursquare was one of the first companies to experiment with push messaging in iOS with the 2010 launch of Radar. What they've learned from that is interesting, that among all the different types of push alerts they were sending out, like friends checking in nearby or nearby deals or other things, the type of message that was getting people to open the app and engage most were the when you get there messages, is kind of how they classified them. What that means is when you get to a new restaurant or a new city, there are suggestions for what to do or what to try or see or eat or what your friends have done in those same locations. And that gets towards Foursquare's overall goal to be a better discovery engine. But the point here is that through that testing, its push alerts now heavily skew towards these when you get there messages. And it's getting heavier engagement and app usage from having tracked that behavior and adjusted its push strategy accordingly. So I guess another lesson in A/B testing and what can come of it. If we go to the next slide, this is still on Foursquare. I just kind of threw this one in for fun. They're also doing some quirky stuff with branded push alerts. This one's from Dos Equis that pushes kind of venue-based updates in the voice and the persona of the most interesting man in the world, who does things like make fun of hipster bars around Brooklyn through push alerts. So it's just kind of an additional fun twist they put on it. So moving to the next case study. Tesco is the world's largest retailer behind Walmart. It seems like a lot of case studies these days are around Tesco. They're doing lots of cool stuff. But here we now get into the topic that I alluded to earlier of in-store beacons. So Tesco has been an early adopter here, and the idea is to reclaim the ground that's been lost through showrooming. So the idea is if you can't beat them, join them. And beacons enable retailers to offer a competitive in-store engagement experience and to intercept users before they fire up Amazon's app, or other showrooming tools. So the main point of what Tesco did here was to treat this as a real utility for users rather than an opportunity to push commercial messaging. So they figured they had more to gain by creating something that is truly of value to in-store shoppers, thus keeping them coming in the store and coming back for more, rather than getting greedy and just using this as a platform to push a bunch of marketing. So their beacon-oriented app does things like let consumers find store associates or sign up for alerts for specific price drops, or alert users when they walk in a store about where to pick up something they may have ordered online, or even do things like pay and check out faster. So it's these types of utilities that I think will be a real differentiator in push alerts within this particular context of beacon-based in-store engagement. It's going to be less marketing-oriented and more service-oriented as it evolves in this context, I believe. So I think where this is going to shine most is clearly the example here of retail, but also things like sporting events. You already see a few ballparks like Fenway Park that have installed beacons, and it's great for captive audiences that want to engage. And again, just a platform for another form of push. So the next and final case study, if we go to the next slide, is from Cluster. And this is where we get into the art of asking for permissions to send push alerts, which I alluded to earlier. And this is, the famous dialog box that we're all familiar with of, saying that the app would like permission to send you notifications. Will you like to allow that? And on a most basic level, this is very important to kind of the art of the kind of permission, not just because iOS requires it, but because this can make or break your push messaging strategy. Because all the benefits of push that we went over and the intended app use case sometimes relies on push, that can all go away if the user does not allow permission. So it becomes vital to ask for it in ways that increase the chances of them saying yes. So Cluster discovered that it's vital to wait to ask users. Don't ask them right off the bat. Wait until you can demonstrate why you need that access and what they'll get in return. So let's drill down a little bit on that. First, it's important to note that if users don't opt in, if we go to the next slide, where you'll see here, you might have lost them forever. What you see on this screen, if we can go to the next slide, which is, I believe, slide 19, this is, the root canal of a process of turning push alerts back on once someone has said no. So when and how you ask them is important, simply in light of the fact that you only get one shot, so make it count. You don't want to put them through this process after they said no, which is very unlikely to happen. So how do you do that is the question. So we go to the next slide. There are a few ways to kind of demonstrate the value exchange of allowing access to push alerts. Some apps have an onboarding process that's an orientation of sorts, and the value is spelled out in kind of simple graphical terms for the features of the app before users are asked for that permission. And the same actually goes, I should make a side note, not just permissions for push alerts, but access to camera roll or contacts and the other things that you're forced to kind of ask. The science is much the same for those permissions. But the point here is by following this practice of demonstrating the value before asking, Cluster was able to increase push alert opt-ins from less than 40% to up to 66%. But they still wanted to do better, interestingly. So the next slide, before I kind of wind down here, what they did here was kind of interesting. Before sending users to the iOS dialog box, which again only has one shot and a potential to lose users forever, they inserted another step in the process within their app to determine which users would be more likely to allow access or not. So they intercepted users with the message that mimics the iOS dialog box, and you can see that here on screen too. And those that granted permission at that point were then sent right on to the iOS dialog box you see in screen 3, where they'll most likely agree because they did so in the first step. But those that click no thanks in that second screen aren't then sent to the iOS dialog box in screen 3. Now that their sentiment has been uncovered, they are instead led back into the app where the campaign continues to win them over for permission and perhaps ask them again in a few days. So the point is that intercepting users before they get to that critical iOS dialog box can reveal and reduce the percentage of users that will click no thanks. And they can be identified and channeled accordingly and then worked on further. So there's actually a lot more to this. I don't want to spend too much time getting into the weeds of this permission strategy, but it's worth going over briefly. And I also want to refer you to the article by Cluster co-founder Brendan Mulligan. And I've actually included a link here to that article on this slide for those of you that end up with the deck. It really gets very detailed into this kind of granular art of asking for permissions, which is just vital to all of this. But again, that's just an introduction to the topic. So this just brings us to the final few slides, winding down. If we go to the next slide, what I'll do now is just a few points to summarize and reiterate a few of the things we went over. So, and you can forward one more slide. So I think I made it clear that messages have to be relevant and engaging, but I'll add here that they should improve over time. That's important because on two levels. One, because users' expectations will kind of grow over time, but also because you have the ability to improve and target messaging based on your tracking and A/B testing, they really should be getting better. And if they're not getting better, there's probably something wrong. And then with some of the above messaging strategies, it's also important to add that you rarely want to send the same message to everyone. Unless it's an Amber Alert or something more or less universal, you should be applying testing towards segmenting audiences into different buckets, into different user profiles, and then pushing messages accordingly. And then another important point here is use the system tools at the OS level. We didn't talk about battery drain that much, but that's a real downside to push alerts, and there are ways to mitigate that, such as backgrounding APIs in iOS, and the M7 chip in the iPhone 5S kind of works towards that end. And another OS level tool that we didn't cover was Passbook. You know, Passbook hasn't really performed so far as well as I thought it would, but I think it still has some potential, such as ticketing and couponing and an authentication standard at the iOS level, and lots of implications for proximity alerts around local shopping and saved coupons and deals. That's probably a whole subject in itself, but something I wanted to mention here to look out for is Apple's Passbook. And then lastly, we talked about beacons, and that'll be a growth area for push alerts, and for all the reasons we went over. But it also must be acknowledged, and everyone always seems to forget to mention this in all the excitement, that beacons require their own additional form of opt-in in the form of users activating Bluetooth in their system settings. So that requires some additional messaging at the store level. So one of the takeaways there is that retailers, for any retailers listening, have to utilize physical store space to communicate and educate users. That's really retailers' game to lose because they have the user under their roof. If Amazon and other showrooming agents beat retailers under their own roofs, then frankly they deserve to lose. So the next slide, kind of one quick final note, even after all of the above precautions are taken with respect to tracking and perfecting the optimal frequency of sending alerts and all that, it's important to go even one step further and allow users the manual control to adjust or turn off notifications in a very easy way. Remember that if notifications become a nuisance and users can't turn them off, they're more likely to end up just deleting the app altogether, which is obviously a lot worse. So really kind of as parting words, think of this as, you know, an ultimate guiding principle to just be user-centric. Push notifications have to be, you know, they have to apply the golden rule, I should say. You know, put yourself in the shoes of the user. And lastly, I'll leave you with this quote, which I won't read through, but the point is similar to the point I just made. On the next slide, please. You know, once you've let users into this very personal space, consider it a privilege, and be a true utility, not a nuisance. And that's done with a lot of the tactics I just went over, and really they probably just scratched the surface, and a lot more you'll hear next from Cindy. So that's about it for me, and I look forward to engaging over this topic and dive deeper with anyone in the coming days that ends up with this deck. My contact information's on it. So thanks for listening, and what I'll do now, I guess, is kick it over to Cindy. So Cindy, to you.
Cindy, before you start.
Oh, I'm sorry, to Mickey. There you are. Sorry.
You know, what about Facebook and Twitter? Where do they play into this now? You know, Facebook's acquisitions of all these push platforms and messaging platforms. Do they have a role to play here?
They do, and Facebook, interestingly, is unbundling their kind of what they call the big blue app which is just the kind of Facebook like flagship app, and you know, kind of they have Instagram as an off property, but they also have a number of Facebook branded properties as apps. One of those, of course, is their Messenger app. So they're doing a lot there that kind of come into this conversation of push messaging. They also have Paper, lots of different kind of areas of discovery. And I think they, like a lot of other people, are feeling around. You know, the A/B testing I espouse, they have kind of like an A/B testing kind of situation on steroids in terms of just the sheer mass of their user base and the privacy concerns that are on them. So I think they're going through this in the same ways that everyone else is in terms of poking around, excuse the pun, poking around at how to go about this right. And in doing so, I think that they're actually a company that everyone interested in push alerts should be watching. What's Facebook doing and learning? Because that could have some overall learnings for the rest of the marketplace. Twitter, to answer that question, I would say the same thing. Twitter's slightly a different use case because it is more narrow. You know, Facebook has so many other forms of social sharing, photos, multimedia. Twitter's getting there with its Cards API, but for now it's really a lot about text or textual messages. So you know, I think that a lot of people that use Twitter, I think it's turned on by default at the OS level for push alerts. And yes, it's a major form of push alert. So they're likewise kind of going through a lot of these same challenges and learning.
Great, thank you, Mike. And ladies and gentlemen, if you'd like a copy of this deck, feel free to email events@messagesystems.com. You know, there's a chat box to the right of your screen. You can also enter your question there, and we try to take as many questions as possible. So I'd like to thank Mike, and we'll move on to